Yo,
Yo, Peter, how you doing?
good. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it looks like you got a little bit of sunshine.
It's I feel like a new man. It's going to be 58 degrees on Saturday, and so that's like an 80-degree swing because last week it was like negative 25, like during the day a few times. So it's huge. Yeah,
The
very
Wyoming weather is
encouraging.
rough.
It is rough. It's a ice box in 6 months of the winter, and then it quickly transitions to furnace mode. It's like incredibly hot. At least it's not humid though. The cold doesn't hurt you bad, and the hot is not that bad either. It can be 110, and if it was 110 in North Carolina, you'd be like dead.
Yeah, those days are very rough. I mean, they're rare, but when it's over 100 and the humidity, it is rough.
Awful. Yeah.
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 Well, what are we talking about today, Peter?
We are talking about progression and different ways of measuring it, different ways of thinking about it, different ways of like emotionally responding to it in healthy ways, challenges in progressing or plateauing or all of the above.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start with, defining progression, then talk about different types of progression, how to measure it, and then some of the challenges that come with that. When you hear the word progression, what do you think of, Peter?
Well, at its core, I consider it getting better, although that needs its own asterisk, right? Because, like, what does it mean to be better in what avenue? Because, like, there are many, many athletes. Like, I was talking with my buddy Luke on a ride this weekend. I was like, Jonas Vingegaard could, like, walk into any high school gym room in the United States or Canada or anywhere. And, like, there's 2 dozen 16-year-old boys that could outlift him almost without a doubt, like maybe whole classes. And yet he's like one of the best athletes in the world. And so, like, you really need to be specific when talking about progression. And what are you trying to progress? Like, how are you measuring getting better? And I think that's really important because it's if you don't have a metric that you're trying to think about, or at least a feeling during a particular situation that you're trying to optimize, then what are you managing? Like, you can only manage what you're measuring. Otherwise, if you're just kind of at the whim of your own personal experience and mood. How do you
Yeah.
think about progression?
Well, I think you hit on something really important, and I think about this a lot. Is context is everything. You know, it, Progressing one thing is probably compromising something else, and so we can't always think about progressing everything all at once. And we have to think about what is our key event or what is our discipline, and are we progressing the right things? And we'll get into that a little bit with threshold, right? Like that's the cornerstone for a lot of things, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but is it always the most applicable? Like we'll see. But yeah, I think progression is the when I think of it in a coaching context and building someone's plan, it's how do we strategically stack a workload to progress the things that we need to in order to be successful in the event,
Hmm.
and know that that might come at a compromise of something else.
For sure. So, like, the number that it seems like the whole cycling world is obsessed with is FTP, functional threshold power. It's almost become such like I mean, here in Wyoming, there's almost no like other cyclists that even would know what that was, which has its own benefits and its own drawbacks. But in certain circles, your FTP is almost like telling somebody your worth or like your bank account. It's like in a different circle, it'd be like, hey, what are your total assets?
Hmm.
You're not going to tell somebody, but even some people would. I don't know, in different circles. But FTP is definitely like this marker that is defining it in the cycling circle. Do you want to go over what FTP is for the
Yeah,
audience?
yeah. FTP, for those of you that don't know, which is probably no one that's listening to this, I think everyone that's listening to this knows.
Yeah.
But it's functional threshold power, and the way that we get it is through a series of different tests. There's different methods, but they're all trying to approximate the power that you could sustain over an hour maximal. Keyword approximate, right? Not many people are going out and doing an hour-long time trial to actually figure that out. They're doing, an 8-minute test, a 20-minute test, a ramp test, a 12-minute test, and it's all just trying to approximate this threshold. That threshold is your lactate threshold 2, where the lactate levels in your blood start to increase exponentially. Right, you're no longer in a maximal sustainable state. You are now, clock's ticking. We've got minutes, no longer hours, right? And then we, base training zones and all of that off of that. But with threshold comes a lot of limitations, right? One, we're approximating it. You could go get a lab test and see, what wattage that lactate spikes, but that has its own limitations, right? Like it's in a lab or it's outside and it's on that day. And, our threshold realistically is changing every day, depending on if we are fatigued, if we're stressed. Like it's not always the same. And we like to think that it is because, cycling is such a data heavy sport. And I think that is a good thing, but it can also come with cons because we're like looking for a number to just like hold on to or define our worth off of. But even if we are to, say, hey, threshold is, the most important, like it's just your ticket to the race. And that's not how you're going to win. Right?
No.
There's all these other nuances of like, how do we progress? How do we become skilled racers? And how do we apply our fitness? And those are the, types of progression we're going to get into today. Yeah. Anything I'm missing there, thinking about threshold?
Well, the most like associated concept with FTP, aside from like raw watts, which are really important, that I think we would be remiss if we didn't also mention like this watts per kilogram associative value, where you just take your FTP and you divide it by how much you weigh, and then that gives you a number, probably for everyone listening here, between 2 and 7. And that's how many watts every kilogram of your body is contributing to the pedals, or ideally. I mean, there's And so, like, even talking about watts per kilogram versus raw watts, it's very easy to make value judgments about yourself or about someone else that are not accurate. Like, I think it's probably better to outperform your expectations. Like, I'm a heavier athlete than you for sure. Like, and will always be. I'm just a bigger person. I'm taller. And so, like, on paper, I would look at your watts per kilogram and be like, I'm going to get absolutely crushed in almost any scenario. But then if we were to like design an ideal course, like, I don't know, just be way up in the air. And I don't really think these are tools, they're not worth comparing or ranking yourself against anyone else. Like the tool that it's for, when it's used most effectively is to like determine the kind of training that you can withstand.
Totally.
Otherwise, like if you want to compare yourself against other people, like don't do it with watts, don't do it with watts per kilogram. Like do it on the race course. Like that's why we race, is like to compete and have fun, and that doesn't even define us as people, but it's a fun thing to do.
Totally. Yeah. And it goes back to like, what's the purpose of training? And it's to get faster. It's not to have X, threshold or IVLA max or, to be defined by these metrics. Is to get faster and do better at the things that we want to, the places we want to perform at, be faster on the course, place better, etc. And I think, not to get like too soapbox or, we do mention this a lot, is the comparison game. And, there's more access to data now than ever before for yourself, but also to look at, pros or your peers. And it's easy to get in your head. It's so easy to get in your head and say, hey, I saw that, this guy's doing 20 hours a week every week. And, I'm only doing 13. Well, like, is he getting faster than me? I was beating him last year. Like, oh no, what do I do? And like, do I need to cram or do I need to panic? And you don't know if that's good for him or not.
100%.
You don't know what he's trying to change, and I'll have athletes ask me that about other athletes. I'm like, I'm not their coach. I have no idea what they're doing, and I don't know if it's
Yeah.
good or bad. But I do know that you're growing, and that's all that matters, right? And
Yeah.
so with that, like, let's dive into some of these progressions. The ones that I threw out on our list here was threshold, power, anaerobic capacity, duration and TTE, repeatability, and then RPE. And so we're not saying threshold, let's start with threshold. We're not saying that threshold is bad by any means. We're just saying it's not the only way to progress. And so when I think of, increasing threshold, it's kind of the rising tide raises all ships to a degree, but there's eventually a ceiling, right? Threshold we can increase. If you're a new rider, you're probably going to see a boost in threshold rapidly, and that's going to feel really good, right? It's the noob gains, and it's like, oh, my FTP is going up, and it's like the one that people talk about in, your circles. But the longer you ride, the less that threshold is going to increase year on year, right?
Hmm.
Like if it could increase year on year 5%, like we'd all have FTPs of 600 watts,
Yeah.
but that's just not. There is a physical limitation to it, but I think it's an important thing to progress, especially if you're a athlete that's looking to compete in longer distances or events that require more steady state riding, such as time trialing, gravel racing, marathon. All that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely important. No denying that. I mean, there's a reason why people talk about it so much. And as a prescriptive indicator, I think it's very good. Like if you have no other tool of defining what kind of work capacity you can do during your workouts probably aren't 5 hours long. They're probably 1 to 3 hours. And it's a really good indicator for the kind of performance you could do on the trainer or on, with your power meter out on the road. But it definitely has problems. And what would you say are like the biggest limitations of like using FTP as the thing that you define your training by? What kind of holes could materialize in an athlete's like power profile if they only focused on FTP? In what ways would they be insufficient or like not properly trained?
I think there's probably two or three things that come to my mind. The first is rigidity of training prescriptions, right? Like, you can go look up training zones. There's different models, right? You might find a 7, a 6, a 3, but they're all kind of based off of some sort of threshold number. But if you held tight to that all the time, you might not be working hard enough. You might be working too hard because the way that people create this FTP number is different, right? So I could produce it and I might be more aerobically dominant. So maybe that is closer to my actual threshold. But someone else that, especially if they did a ramp test or an 8-minute test that's anaerobically dominant, is going to have a inflated FTP. And people
Yeah.
hate hearing that.
Right.
It's like, oh, hey, like I know that you did this test and it says your FTP is 350, but you're anaerobically dominant and your FTP is probably closer to 320.
Yeah. That's me.
And that's an ego hit, right? But so then if we take that to training prescriptions and, say we're working on VO2, which is typically written at 115 to 130%, and if we put that, give you that workout, that might not be enough.
Yeah. Because I'm way more anaerobic of an athlete than you by comparison. And so like I can hit
Sure.
the VO2 effort, which is 5 minutes or less typically, much easier than I can do like a longer interval at a FTP pace.
Yeah, especially if we were doing like 40/20s or something like that. Like there's riders out there that can repeat one or even 1 minute on, 1 minute off. They can repeat that at 150% for an
Hmm.
hour,
Yeah.
which is wild. I mean, some of the best cross racers are that way because that is such a, anaerobically dominant discipline. But for them to hold that same normalized power consistently, it probably wouldn't go great. Like they rely on that surge and that anaerobic capacity to be applied and recharged, right? And so, yeah, you have to have this, threshold and be a little bit more nuanced and like not be so rigid with the training prescriptions. And then the opposite, so going below, is also true. Say we do go ahead and set FTP at 350, well, like maybe you need to be riding at 50% of FTP for zone 2 instead of 70%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for
70%
sure.
you might be doing you might actually be in like zone 3 from a toll standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that's the first one is, being too rigid on prescriptions. I think the other whole, if you just focus on threshold, is if that's not one of the key drivers for your discipline, you're gonna be at a performance disadvantage.
Yeah.
Because, yes, the rising tide, lifts all ships to a point, but like once we're getting closer to that ceiling, like if you're training threshold, you're compromising something else. But, and this is a hard pill for folks to swallow too, is that give and take, right? And so if you only focus on threshold, your anaerobic capacity is gonna come down, right? When we
Mm-hmm.
do over unders, when we do threshold work, like we're trying to lower the rate of production of lactate, right? Which then means we're not going to be as surgy or snappy as if we're trying to elevate it. But if we work on that anaerobic capacity, then threshold goes down. And
Yeah.
people don't like that, but like, because they want everything to just go up.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be a sprinter and a climber and a GC specialist and all these things, right? Like
Yeah.
that's just not how physiology works. So I think that's the other big con if like we only hone in on threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to remind athletes of that. And that's where, we get into these other aspects of progression.
Well, yeah. One other thing before we talk about some of these other progression indicators is I think listening to your body and like having a tuned sense for like how you're feeling and how you're doing is a hard thing to trust. Like when training is so prescriptive and so exacting nowadays, and there is a lot of purpose for that. Like there's a huge benefit to being like, hey, like I'm gonna do what the plan, what Training Peak says, what Coach John says, like pretty much no matter what. Like you need a kick of tenacity. Like I'm just gonna get after it. And maybe I'm a little bit down, but I'm just gonna do it anyways. Like that's important. But there's also this like you need to weigh like, hey, like how do I really feel right now? And like, because on any given day, it changes a lot. And like, if you're getting this panicked mode during an interval that should not put you into panic mode, like something's up. And like, you're not trying to tick a green box. Your goal is to like create adaptations, or like you're trying to make your muscles like signal to your body, like, I need to get stronger, or I need my heart to enlarge, or whatever it is, whatever kind of adaptation you're trying to trigger. I think there's a balance between like listening to your body and just having tenacity and perseverance and just doing it anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And it takes wisdom and time to like know how to do that for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits of training in general is, it is a process of exploration and exploring your limits and getting to know your body better,
Hmm.
and sharpening your mind. And obviously that all comes into play in racing, but it also, is applicable in life too.
Yeah. It's also, sorry for interrupting. That's one of the huge values in having a coach. Like I have found with anyone I've coached, or even when I've reached out to you for things, like I have never heard you say like, just do it anyways, you pansy. It's like it's always like, hey, like you're not feeling good, like do it tomorrow. Like wait,
Hmm.
like it's not really a race. Like you got to strike when the iron's hot in a lot of times.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, if we try to force it sometimes, it's probably going to backfire. It may be neutral, but I think over time of trying to force things, it is ultimately going to inhibit progress, and progress takes time. We probably should have said that in the beginning, is like progression takes time. And different things take different times to progress, right? Like we can boost sprint performance pretty quickly. It's also the quickest thing to erode, but something like threshold, that's going to take a lot longer,
Yeah.
So, yeah, moving on to, another, area that we look at for progression potentially is, raw power or anaerobic capacity. And so this is really getting sub 2 minutes, 90 seconds, 60 seconds, going all the way to sprint. When I say that, what disciplines pop in your mind where this might be relevant?
For me, everything. But crits, huge in road racing, cyclocross, track, like anything on the velodrome. There's like no race on the velodrome that's like long at all. Like they're all crazy short. Even the 3K is like very short. But even like I do a lot of gravel right now, and even though probably physiologically I'm more of a crit racer, you can save a lot of energy by just being a bit more powerful because like you're not going to lose wheels. Like you're there, and you don't have to go as deep into the hurt locker if you can just hit it real hard and like cover something.
Mm-hmm.
But typically, like the super draft intensive racing disciplines and often flatter,
Mm-hmm.
where like the raw short term peak power has its largest advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I would make the case that XCO is becoming more
Yeah,
anaerobically, maybe not dominant, but important, and
short track for sure.
for sure short track.
Yeah,
But, modern XC courses, the races shoot to be hour to an hour and a half. And, it's not crazy long. It's long enough to hurt for sure.
hmm
But on an average, XCO course, it's 2 to 3 minute climbs per lap. And that's coming down closer to raw watts, right? Like things
for
aren't
sure.
long enough, going back to what you were talking about with watts per kilo, like being a pure climber is not going to help you perform on an XC course anymore.
hmm
You got to be able to put out a lot of watts for a short amount of time on these punchy courses. Yeah, enough time to like settle into your, 20-minute pace.
Yeah, you look at Vanderpool is a perfect example of this kind of athlete who's like an absolute horse. Like the mouth breathers over at Pink Bike, they like to talk about his ramp incident, but like he's a beast. Like he can shred a bike for sure, and there's a reason he was so dominant. It's like he can just put out more power than anyone else for 2 to 3 minutes, 3 times a lap. Like he was incredible at that, and he uses that to his advantage. Like he punishes his competitors in a big way.
Yeah, yeah, you're not trying. Yeah, I'm not trying to hold on to his wheel. I'm just
No,
letting you go great.
no, no.
And he has the bike handling to suit,
Yeah,
But yeah, and so, when we think about, measuring this progression, obviously we can look at, raw watts. And then, the second piece to this is that repeatability, right? Like anyone can go hard for 60 seconds or 2 minutes, if that's what we're looking at. But can you do it 12 times over?
hmm yeah,
That's where that, repeatability matters. And, say we've built up our capacity, right? Like our max anaerobic ability to where we need it or where we want it to be. That next step of looking at progression is like, hey, can we repeat this 90-second, effort or 2-minute effort 8 times? Okay, we knocked that out of the park. Can we do it 10 times? Can we get up to that
hmm
12 point? Maintain, the 12th effort was as strong as the first.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
As a coach, I'm looking at that like that means, oh, we're going to do a lot better in an XC race now
yeah.
because you can repeat. You could do this. You could look at the repeatability with 5 minutes, whatever the duration is. That repeatability matters a ton.
Yeah. Huge, huge, because races aren't 3 minutes long.
No,
unless you're on
none
a
of the ones that I
velodrome.
do.
None of the ones I'm interested in.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, you know, it, and we could increase that, but your FTP has never gone up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, but you're a stronger athlete, and I think it's important for people to remember, like, the threshold isn't the only way to become better, right? It's like you should feel just as accomplished completing, yeah, you know, 12 3-minute efforts or 12 2-minute efforts as setting a new FTP. If
For
that's like your
sure.
all-time best, like at repeating that high of watt,
Yeah.
that's a win. That's a huge win. And I think sometimes we don't celebrate those things enough. Or yeah, we got through that hard workout that has just been, punching us in the throat for the last, month or year, and like we
Yeah.
finally did it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there will be a point when like if you do enough of them, then it becomes like not aerobic capacity anymore. Like that you probably aerobic capacity has risen. So like you might need to just like raise the power that you're doing. Like if you can do 15 super high power 2-minute efforts, like
Not doing it
maybe
right
you
now.
go way higher at like if you only did five,
Yeah.
and
And I think that goes back to like not being super rigid, right?
yeah,
Of okay, like I knocked that out of the park. Like, what if I could do it at 145% instead of
yeah,
130? Like, let's try it, right? Like, um, that's a way to grow.
for sure.
Yeah, and so yeah, I think we've gone through power, repeatability. The other one is duration, right? Like maybe we take that 2 minute and we stretch it to 3 minutes, right?
Hmm.
That's another way that we can progress workouts, and we can do that on the short, or we can do that on the long thresholdy stuff too, right? Like let's add another over under onto this 12-minute set to make it 15 minutes, and like that's another way to progress workouts. And that kind of gets into TTE, which there's softwares that predict this metric, such as WKO or exert. That's time to exhaustion. So like, can you hold the same power for longer than you used to be able to hold it for, right? And
Yeah,
that's, I think TTE becomes incredibly important in road racing, especially if you're doing stage racing or mountain bike stage racing. Sure. Gravel racing, definitely. Like almost every gravel race I've done, and maybe it's just the ones I've been to, it starts like an XCO. And then it just turns into like a time trial of like who can hold FTP for a while. Okay, who can hold sweet spot for a longer, and then who
yeah,
can maintain some level of power for the last bit.
yeah. You're like 110 miles in, and you're like struggling, like hold like 225 up a climb, and you're like, what happened to me?
Yeah, yeah. And it's like there's zero pacing. It's just like all like
Yeah,
off the gun and then just attrition.
yeah.
And so
Tons of
like
attrition.
TTE in that situation is massive.
Huge. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and like just it'll pay huge dividends. I mean, all of those things, like all of these indicators, whatever kind of metric you're training for at any given time. And I think it's really, really helpful to like constantly switch the stimulus or, systematically, like
Mhm.
go through a block. That's kind of the philosophy I'm operating under right now is like maybe because I'm a bit of a caveman and I can only focus on like one thing at a time. But all of these things contribute to becoming a strategic, capable athlete who can like use the tools at their disposal to the
Mhm.
best of your ability. You and I would race the same race differently, optimally, just because we're physiologically different athletes. And so like we would operate with different strategies to like succeed the best.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's totally true. The caveat I'll put to that is like there's flexibility in physiology too of how we train, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, someone could say, "Oh, well, I'm not X type of rider." But if you signed up for an event that requires, something different than what you're naturally gifted at, like you got to try to change it, right?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
you just have to. Like if you were an ultra guy and then all of a sudden you want to, race cross country, like you're going to spend a year or two trying to change things up,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know.
that's a good point. I think it's a good reminder to get a little bit not define yourself so much. I think with training, if we were to just like switch, I think with training, we could probably switch how we are talking about how we relate to our own power profiles. Like with enough training, like you could become an incredibly anaerobic athlete. And you already are, but like you could become a primarily anaerobic athlete. And with enough training, I could become a primarily aerobic athlete. Um, they're not, it's not like these things were chiseled in stone before time
Yeah.
began.
Yeah, and there's a lot of overlap,
Yeah.
and um, yeah, yeah. So I think it's always nuanced and but I think if we are going to change a profile or try to elevate a profile, like we have to be able to measure it, right? And so we have to measure this progress. And yeah, we talked about these different things to measure, but like how do we do that? Yeah, we could look at reps repeated, duration, what power it's at, all of those things. I think one of the biggest challenges, or you alluded to this a second ago, of like focusing on one thing, and like that's where we get into periodization of a season or multiple years, even if we're trying to like go after some really big event. And that's because our bodies aren't great at handling conflicting stimuluses at one time, right? Like you're not going to be able to increase anaerobic capacity while also like focusing on threshold deliberately. Like they're kind of competing against each other, and like yeah, you might get some benefit, or you get a benefit and you don't know which stimulus is causing it. Like you're faster, but you're not really sure if it's like one side or the other. And so that's where we get into like, hey, during this build block, like we're really focusing on raising VO2. So we're going to do a lot of that 2 to 8 minute work, and we're going to drive that home. And we're going to build that block. Could be up to 8 weeks, maybe longer if we really want to. And we're looking at building progression within those 8 weeks, right? Like we might start with microbursts and then we work our way up to 5x5s, or, a 6 to 8 minute stair step interval, something like that, to, find a measure of progress.
I think having those points of measuring progress are really important. And it can look like a number improving. You can see it on a graph. You could plot it on a graph. A tool that I'm a fan of is repeated workouts that might be aspirational at the beginning. It might be to the point where it's like, I can't do this. It's like, let's say you have a 4 week block and you put it at, every Friday or whatever. And hopefully by the end of the block, it's like, it's not just a number on the graph going up or a data point on the graph. It's like, no, I finished that and it felt great. Because at the end of the day, like when you're racing, like you're not looking at a graph, or if you are, you're probably doing it wrong. It's about like being able to withstand the load that's imposed on you, or imposing the effort on other people through attacking or whatever. I really like the repeated workouts for that reason of having like a physical like measuring stick to like compare myself against. And part of that is just like not like being okay that this workout is aspirational. I might not be able to do the end one, the last set or the last interval here.
Yeah, I think that's all really great. I think a lot of people get scared of that. Like they view it as, I didn't complete this workout and I'm a failure because of it. And that's not true. It's like, oh, cool. Like I get excited when we find that breaking point. If an athlete finds that breaking point, I'm like, cool. Like now I know we have something to work towards, right? Like we found a hole and like now we can work on it. Like if you're
Yeah.
completing everything, like, and nothing's challenging you, like we're not pushing hard enough, right?
Yeah.
And like we're always looking for that like knife edge, right? Like it doesn't need to be like so extreme that like we're failing everything, like, but an occasional like, oh yeah, this is my point, like that's good.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like the repeated workout versus variety, right?
Mm-hmm.
I hear both sides of it, and I think we can have a balance of both. You can have a variety of progressing workouts, 30-15s to 40-20s to constant efforts, right? Like you're working the same system and you're progressing through that. but it might look like you're repeating, the 40-20s 4 times in a row until they're locked down, or you hit the number, the point where we want you to be. And that's not attractive to some people. Like they want
Right.
constant variety, right? Like we want stimulus. It's, TikTok brain or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think, hopefully I don't get put on blast for this, but like that's one of the, pros and cons of a program like Trainer Road is it's giving you a novel workout almost always. Like nothing's the same. And like, yes, it's still working the same system. So you're in a VO2 block, like it is going to be the same system, but I think it gets challenging. And I've had athletes that have come from, a Trainer Road or similar tell me this is like one of the struggles that they had was, they rank a workout like a 7.2 or 7.4. And so like, it's harder or easier, but you don't say you struggled on it, like you don't get it again
Yeah.
next week or 2 weeks from now to say like, oh, like I nailed it. Like I put a nail in that coffin and it's done and I've
Yeah.
accomplished it. And so I think there's something to be said for, having those staples. And, train also doesn't have to be complicated or incredibly various to be effective.
Yeah. I think the risk that you run, or that I run for sure, with a lot of repeated workouts is you are limiting how varied your stimulus is. And like, we're not saying that varied stimulus is bad. Like, varied stimulus is great. It does really good things for your body. So I think like in order to avoid that risk, like I've personally been like doing shorter blocks. Like if a block is 3 weeks long, like I can do 2 blocks when I might have used to do like an 8 week block or something, or a 6 week block. But yeah, I think that the repeated workouts that you get in, or that a coach can give, are great aspirational achievements, or just indicators of just like giving a person like little breadcrumbs to follow me. Like, hey, I'm headed the right direction. Like, hey, I got 4 out of 5, and last week I wasn't able to finish the fourth one, and then by the end of the block, you're smashing all 5 of them, or
Yeah, I
whatever it
mean,
may be.
a good example too is like season over season. Is I had this conversation yesterday. I have an athlete. He was a little disappointed, just feeling like his numbers weren't where he wanted them to be. And I think primarily thinking of that threshold number, like why hasn't my threshold gone up? But looking at year over year, like yes, his threshold has gone up, but more importantly, looking at a 2-minute repeat, he's up over 100 watts or close to 100 watts this
It's a
time
big deal.
last year.
Yeah.
And it's February and like racing hasn't even started.
Yeah.
That's good, right? And like he hit those numbers when it was, mid race season. So it's like that's a huge marker of progress. I don't care what your FTP says, like that's going to make you faster lap on lap.
For sure. 100% will.
So
And it's like it's a natural way to like. I was looking through my training peaks and my Strava at the past year, and I was like, it's I can see the value in being like, let's do the same thing, the same aspirational thing, like in a year from now, or I'm sure like a year ago, I could do what I was doing a year ago, like on a recovery day almost,
yeah.
just in my little journey.
Yeah, I had an athlete the other week that was the case, like his now, what he's recovering at between intervals was what his intervals were at,
Yeah.
a year and a half ago. And it's like, that's massive, right? Like that, what was once maximal is now like recovery. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
pretty remarkable. So I think there's, these different ways to find the wins and see the progress.
For sure.
And then think about how that applies to your racing and your unique event.
Yeah.
Each event's going to be a little bit different, and like where we're going to find those markers.
For sure. Yeah. Super valuable.
I think we covered the main topics. Any other
It's a good
thoughts
talk.
on progression?
I think as a kind of where we started this conversation of like using any of these metrics as primarily self-reflective because if you go down the road of comparing yourself against others, not a whole lot positive comes from that. They're without like really good guidance and like mature thinking people around you. If it becomes an area where we're like ranking each other against, it's very easy. There's so much data out there to like compare yourself against like Matteo Jorgensen or like any of these people. And what's good for them is not what an individual athlete needs. Like just kind of keeping trusting the process and using your metrics as self-motivating factors, I think is the best case scenario. Worst case would be like being down in the dumps because I can't do the watts that Matteo Jorgensen can, and he's 25 pounds less than me. So it's like it's not helpful to anybody, you know. I'm not a professional athlete either.
Totally. Yeah, and I think it's remembering, yeah, your context, your growth, your path is going to look different than someone else's, and that's all you can really ask for. And like your restraints and your challenges are different than theirs, right? Like it could be a time thing, or it could be what we talked about on our last episode was you have to be patient, and sometimes like things don't progress as quickly as you want, right? Like your body might not be ready to handle 20-hour weeks if that's what you could do, right? Like again, it doesn't matter like how much training you do, it's how much you can take in. Like I want to progress volume, but now I'm getting sick every third week.
Yeah.
That's probably an indicator that you're pushing too hard, right? Like build fatigue, and then all of a sudden your body's crumbling. It's not appropriate progression.
For sure. Yeah. What are some like telltale signs that you need to recover? That you need to like pull the plug and rest? We covered a lot of this last time, but like just I think it's worth going over again.
Yeah, I think one is your mood, right? Like, are you a little like less patient? Are you like, getting angry over something that's like benign? Like it's just like it doesn't matter, and you're like throwing a hissy fit. Like it's probably because you're like irritable because you're like overtrained or getting close to that point. And then I think general fatigue. Like, do you feel like more like we as athletes we're used to carrying like a certain level of fatigue, but is it excessive? Like I need to take a nap every day. Well, it's probably not ideal. Yeah, are you excessively sore? Right? Like there's one thing to be like, sore from the gym, or like, I did 40-20s like this morning and like my legs are a little heavy, like to be expected. But like, are you excessively sore going up and down the stairs? Like it's not where we need to be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, enthusiasm. Like, am I dreading? Am I like seriously questioning? Am I overthinking? Like, oh, should I do this? Should I do this? Should I do this? If I'm like looping that thought in my head for like hours before I do the workout, probably a sign I should not do the workout because like I might be able to like grit my teeth and do it, but like if I'm not like a little bit enthusiastic to see or curious to see what I can do, then the adaptation is probably not going to come in the way that I want it to because I'm already exhausted.
Yeah, I think that one's a hard one for people to like feel out a little bit, because there are like certain workouts that should feel scary and like you said, aspirational, of like I'm gonna go try to do 5x5s at 4:30. Like that might make your stomach feel like towing a line of a race. Like this is gonna hurt. But there should be, some level of like, I want to see if I can do this, and like motivation there.
Yeah.
But if it's just like nothing but dread, then, maybe something else is going on.
For sure. Yeah. And like I think endurance athletes, it's just an aside. I saw do you know who Ali Ostrander is? She's a runner. She makes YouTube videos. She did a little shorts about like these are some tricks that like endurance has taught me, as like how to gaslight myself hard, how to like how to do like runner math, which is the same as cyclist math. You're like, okay, this is the one before the last one, so I'm basically done. It's like if those tricks aren't like we're gonna need those tricks like forever. Anytime you're training, like you need to like use those tricks. But if none of them are working, like it's trying. It's I think it's important to like both own that it's going to be hard, but also like give yourself the rest that you need.
What's your favorite cyclist math to do in a workout?
60 is the reason there's 60 minutes in an hour is because 60 is extraordinarily divisible, or 360 degrees. That is the reason why 360 degrees is like if you use degrees to measure the circle, it's super divisible. So I like to like break that into chunks of like 12 or 15 or whatever it is, 24. It doesn't really work super smoothly with 24. And then I like to predict what is my distance going to be at an hour. I spend a lot of time on the trainer, as you know. So I do a lot of like it just helps me to like think about. And it's not like I'm not integrating, but it's like difficult enough mental math to be like, okay, like if I did 17 miles an hour for 15 minutes and this is this many miles, like how do I multiply that over to
Mm-hmm.
however long I'm going to ride, an hour 45 or whatever it is? What's yours?
Intervals, I always count to half and then I count down.
Oh, you count up to half?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so say like
Nice.
I have 8 intervals, it's like I get to 4 and then I'm counting down because then it's like the end is near.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus like, oh, I gotta like get all the way to 8. I think it's just a mental thing
Hmm.
I do. It's kind of like like, oh, I'm on my last one. I'm almost
Yeah.
done. It's like, oh, I
Yeah.
only have 2 more.
For sure. Yeah. I think the first one is hard, even though it might not physically be hard, but like I'm like if I can get through the first one, that's fine. And then the middle set is where I'm like settling in, and I might tell myself the lat if I have four left, for example, like the third to go or two to go is the hardest one. And then
Mm,
it's like when the horses smell the barn, you just finish the
yeah.
last one or two, depending how long they are. It's like no big deal.
I see that in the data all the time. It's
Yeah.
like the first one's like okay, and then yeah, there's like you hit a stride, and then maybe it dips down, and then the last one's like exceptionally high
Yeah.
comparative to like the last two, and you're like,
Yeah.
it's just it's like oh we're there, we're done.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The first one almost like never feels good in my experience.
Yeah. So you just got back from Puerto Rico.
Did. Yep. We had 6 athletes down there, 5 for the whole time. One came down just over the weekend. Kick off the XC season with some warm weather, hard racing. It is crazy, like the season starts in February now. It's early, but I think it's a good thing to get down there, and the race organizers do such a good job at that race. And then, people have been on the trainer for a minute now. They're like hungry to like see some of this work like in the real world and pay off and just get some of that stoke going. But yeah, overall, like really successful trip. We had a podium. We got other athletes getting their first UCI points. Some really strong performances, even if like the results didn't pay off because we snapped a seat off, but like the legs were firing and like ready to link it up the rest of the season. Yeah, it was a good time. The downside, we lost our car rental keys on the morning we were supposed to leave, so we disassembled some rear brakes to get the car out of a tight spot to load up onto a tow truck to get home
Dang.
because I guess they don't keep spare keys. So that seems like
Man.
a flaw, but I'm not the manager of a car rental facility
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
those decisions. But yeah, man, it was good way to start the season, and yeah, we're
Did you eat any plantains?
yeah a little bit of mofongo. Yeah,
I was thinking about that word and I couldn't, it wasn't hitting me, but yeah.
yeah, dude, it's so good. I wish there were more places readily available that had it here.
Yeah, it'd be great. There's
Uh,
not a prayer in Wyoming.
yeah, no shot, no shot.
Zero shot. Yeah. People are like, tacos, that's ethnic food. Like,
Yeah, like
not really.
and it's a hard shell taco at that. But yeah, it was a good time. The course down there is fun. It's fairly dynamic. Yeah, we had some mechanicals, but
There were two races, right?
There were 2 XCOs and 1 short track.
Okay, nice. Were they all in Salinas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there's another set this weekend in Rincon, but we decided to just go down for the first week. I've done the multi-week previous years, and it's awesome, but it is a lot of time to.
Especially if you're in school.
Yeah, especially if folks are in school, it becomes almost a 2.5 week trip. And then now the season is a little bit more compressed with some other races shifting closer. And so, it's that balance. It's hard in season. You get stuck in the race and recover cycle, and you're not getting the most productive training done. You're kind of just trying to hold on to this fitness you've built all through the base and early season. So coming back a little bit earlier gives most athletes a full training block before the next race block.
Very cool.
But yeah, what's going on in your world? How's training going? Bicarb experiments?
Yeah.
What's cooking in Peter's world?
I have been experimenting a little bit more bicarb, and kind of, if I were to write a book right now, it'd be like balling on a budget, like how to give yourself good nutrition on so cheap. So my latest strategy, no hydrogels, no alginate, no, it's just baking soda at 0.3 grams per kilogram body weight or something. And it ends up being quite a lot. It's a significant amount. So if you were to have a little drinking glass, it'd be solid 3/4 of an inch of baking soda at least. So I just put more sugar. I put sugar with it. And then I don't fill up the glass with water. I just put enough to make kind of a sauce. And then I just down it as fast as possible. And that is a way, I know it sounds gnarly, but it's so much easier than diluting it in water. Because if it's in half a liter of water, you got to drink that for several minutes. You're not gonna just chug half a liter of water. I wish there's those dudes that can just with a bottle of water. I can't do that. So this has worked way better. And for whatever reason, it seems to not bother my gut nearly as bad. I didn't inflate like I have in the past, and no digestional distress. So I'm still conflicted over assigning causality, but I will use it if I'm this is going to be a heavy one, and I want whatever placebo effect. If it's placebo, I want that. So that's the, aside from the usual homebrew sugar mix that I've been thinking about using for a long time now. I thought of a sweet analogy that is very much in this high carb fueling world is a lot of people are treating their training or their racing or just training towards racing they're in an electric car race where they only have one battery and they got to make that battery last for the duration of the race. So they're trying to become more efficient, which is not a bad goal. But the problem is there's batteries available to you out on the course, in the terms of sugar, or you can carry more fuel with you as if you're using the battery analogy, it's for free. It weighs nothing to have what's another 400 grams of carbs. That's less than a pound, and you're going to be carrying water anyways. So it's the goal shouldn't be how efficient can I make my body, but the goal is how much fuel can I push through my body and properly metabolize and turn into energy? Can I make that energy pathway, if you're viewing it like a nozzle, as wide at huge open gates, where it's how brilliant would it be to actually be able to use 150 grams of carb an hour? That would be amazing. If you could I think that's what a lot of the pro tour guys are doing.
Yeah.
Their body can take it. It's dangerous to you don't want to overdo it. But in training, I think I've been so convinced by this high carb training, being so effective for endurance athletes, despite it being counterintuitive, because it's possibly the worst thing you can do if you're not training.
Sure.
You know, it's like the opposite of any sort of like generic health advice you would get. But like, I think if you can reduce how bad you can get depleted, you're going to recover faster. Like, you're going to adapt way better, and you're going to be ready to go again, like way quick.
Really. Yeah, I think it's, I still have athletes that, are growing and changing in that mindset. But for so long is like what's the minimum I can get away with? And it's like we need to shift that to like what's the maximum I can bring in and work with, right?
Yeah.
Our bodies are like a Ferrari, and like both need fuel to run, but the difference with a Ferrari is like it still can perform maximal with a quarter left in the tank. That's not how the human body works.
Yeah.
Like if we're on a quarter tank, our performance starts to decrease, and so it's like we need
Yeah.
to be topping off any chance we get.
Hmm.
And like the reality too is you're never, I'm sure there's a scenario, but like by and large, you're never going to out eat the work that you're doing on the bike if you're a high performing athlete.
For sure.
Like,
Yeah.
there's no way. Like, if you're doing 1,000 kJs an hour, you're you're gonna be hard pressed to
Can't take that in.
no. It'd be 250 grams of carbs.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't.
Which would be incredible. Like maybe
It would
that's the
be
upper human limit. Like maybe that's what we see in 15 years, you know?
sure, but like until then, it's like you're not out eating. Like so, you're just trying to diminish the hole that you're putting yourself in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the longer the race, the more intense the race, like the bigger that hole is going to be. And so you might as well just bring in as much as you can.
Yeah.
And
For
then
sure.
the other thing too is if you're training a lot, which like even if you're doing 12 hours, like you're starting to get into like decent volume, like the energy burden that training becomes is very, camera went out.
Yeah. I can still hear you. Is it still recording? I think it is.
There we go. But the energy burden of training is a real thing, right? Like if you go do a 5 hour ride, then it's going to be a lot to like eat all of that back the rest of the day, especially if you rode through lunch, right? And so
Hmm.
by staying on top of it while you're riding is going to make it easier to,
Yeah.
yeah, not be so in the hole.
I almost desire like a cone of silence or like have you heard of an anechoic chamber? It's like that chamber that's like incredibly deadening
Mm-hmm.
to like not hear any sort of like general health or diet advice, you know, other than because it's like for like if you're a sedentary person or just like you work a normal job and you're not like an endurance athlete, like what you need to eat and like what you need to like think about with your diet are like it's like a different planet.
Mm-hmm.
The demands placed on an endurance athlete are so primary to their like so central to like the difficulty of it that refueling is critical to like getting better like
Mm-hmm.
because it's so energy intensive.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you're trying to do it in like a clean fashion, right? Like eating 6,000 calories in a day is like a chore.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Like,
You're not gonna eat that much salad. Like,
no, and like you have to start finding like denser foods for sure.
yep.
But like, I mean, the volume of food that like I eat on like a long day is a lot, and like, I'm tracking it not to restrict myself, but to hold myself accountable. Like, am I like getting enough that this work that I did was actually beneficial? Because if you're not getting enough, you're kind of wasting your time. Like you're just suffering without getting the benefit.
Yeah. And some people like to suffer. That's okay. I think I think about spin class at like a YMCA or something. I think that's primarily just designed to make people suffer and like not actually improve.
Yeah. Yeah, it
It's a
feels
different
good.
topic, but
Yeah, yeah, you
it
get.
feels good to suffer sometimes.
Yeah, I low key think I would get wrecked in a spin class. Like I
I
don't know,
mean, maybe.
I haven't done it, but like I see the videos and I'm like, they're standing up doing like 130 cadence, and like I've not once ever done that.
Yeah, for sure. It is not cycling, which is okay. You know, it's its own thing. We might hate for that, but it's its own thing, and that's it's okay.
Maybe next team camp, we'll all go to a spin class and see who can
Yeah,
handle it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is displaying my ignorance, but I don't really know how those like spin bikes work. Like, is it just a dial, like a magnet, or like a friction thing? So, is
At
it
least
just all
like
relative? Like, hurt yourself as much as you want and just keep turning it up?
I think the last one, like spin bike I used in a gym was like that. But
Yeah,
I imagine like anything, there's probably like fancier gamified versions that maybe have watts or electronic resistance or something.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Anyways, with that, we should wrap it up.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the time.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yep, we'll come up with some other ideas for our next one and get on with it.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have questions and you're watching this and you want advice by a person who knows a ton and a person who knows a little bit, then we'll answer.
We'll let you guys try to figure out which one knows a lot and which one knows a little. And it probably flip flops each day.
Depends. All righty. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Peace.
See ya.